keep WebEx muted until you actually.
Good morning, Mr. Stewart. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly. Now, as you understand, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McIntosh. But before that, will you take the oath?
I'm happy to take the oath.
Sitting where you are, would you raise your right hand and repeat these words after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Now, we would plan to take a coffee break about 11:30, but if you want to take a break at any time during your evidence, just give an indication and we'll take a break. Now, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Stewart, I wonder if you can give us your full name.
James Stewart, or do you want my other names as well?
Well, normally we conventionally ask for a full name, but...
James Alexander Gustav Harold Stewart.
Thank you. And you produced a statement for the inquiry. Are you content to adopt that as part of your evidence?
Yes.
And could I ask what your current role is or occupation?
I am retired from a full-time job. I have a number of part-time roles, which I can detail if you wish.
No, I think we have some of them in the background, but I understand you recently completed a report for the government on the High Speed 2 project.
I did, yes. So it was submitted in January, published in June. And it was actually, to be specific, it was on major infrastructure projects based on HS2, but incorporating wider lessons for UK infrastructure projects.
Thank you. To what extent did it address issues of corporate governance in infrastructure projects in the UK?
A lot.
And presumably it would cover the management of risks and control of a project and how one got what one wanted from a project.
Yes. I mean, there was a specific remit. It concentrated on governance, assurance, cost estimates, the way costs were controlled, capability, So it was quite a wide-ranging report. I mean, could I ask a question, please, in regards to the proceedings today? Because you may well ask me questions which are to do with my role on the project, but you also may ask me questions which I would classify as being an expert witness because of my wider knowledge, you know, and you've just been asking me about that report, and obviously I went deep into governance. So I think it would be helpful for me to be clear when you're asking me a sort of expert witness question and when you're asking a question with regard to my role on the project.
I certainly can do that. It's probably worth explaining why we're calling you as a witness. So this inquiry is investigating the procurement of the new South Glasgow Hospital project, which cost something north of £700 million and has 1,300 rooms, in a consequence of concerns that emerged some years after it opened around the effectiveness of the ventilation and water systems of the building and whether they had an effect on patient safety. To take it very short, there seems to be an echo in this room, and I wonder if the IT team can think about that. And the reason we called you is because we are speaking to anybody we can get hold of who was involved in the original decision-making processes in 2009 prior to contract close, and you were a member of the New South Glasgow's Hospitals and Laboratories Executive Board. But of course, I am conscious that you have an expertise in procurement governance, and you did then as well. So yes, I will ask you questions that relate to your skills and experience. We've not been taking a formal view on expertise other than the inquiry's instructed experts. And so we have repeatedly asked questions of persons of skill who were involved in the project and have taken opinion evidence from them. Generally, it's opinion evidence about infections and epidemiology. That doesn't apply to you. So just as we would ask a consultant infection control doctor a question about causal link based on data that has emerged since the events, I might ask you questions about governance. And I'm conscious that you might not remember because it is an awfully long time ago. And to that extent, we'll try and help. But before we do that, just to understand, if you think back to 2008-9 and the environment that procurement was in, what were the sort of issues that were causing government to be concerned about the procurement of expensive public infrastructure and investment projects?
Well, if you date 2008, 2009, most, not all, but a lot of the public procurement had taken place under PPPs. Now, reading the papers, I can't remember this, but reading the papers make it clear that at some point, and you'll know when that was, a decision was made to move from a PPP structure to a conventional procurement, a design and build.
Yes, about 2008, early in 2008.
Yeah, so I think it was before my involvement. So the reality is that there was probably much more experience in a PPP environment at that time than a design and build environment, because most of the procurements had gone through a PPP because that was the preferred option for pursuing these projects at the time. But yeah, I mean, I would say that, I mean, I wouldn't make any comment that we were in a particular peak in terms of skills of procurement or a particular dip. I think, as I said, the majority of the skills were around PPP, but there was still lots of people who understood how to do design and build.
And in terms of Partnerships UK as an organisation, I appreciate that you've explained in your statement that you don't remember the particular circumstances of your instructions for this hospital, but can you help us understand what Partnerships UK was designed to address when it was set up?
I can, yes. So Partnerships UK was established in the year 2000 off the back of a body that there was this predecessor called the Treasury Task Force. So the Treasury Task Force was set up under the chair of Adrian Montague, who had about 12, 13 people in it, all on secondment. It was set up to help the government pursue the PFI PPP program. It was seen as a good thing, and PUK was then set up as an enlarged and more resilient and long-lasting entity. So its primary purpose was to support the government in the pursuit of the PPP, PFI. Well, I'm saying PPP. I'll use the words PFI and PPP interchangeably.
Understand.
At the time it was set up, it was the PFI. And it had an unusual structure in that it was 51% owned by the private sector. It was 49% owned by the public sector. And the public sector shareholding was shared between the UK Treasury, Her Majesty's Treasury, and Scottish ministers. And actually, at the beginning, all the devolved territories were given the opportunity to become shareholders. Only the Scottish ministers took that up. I think I'm going to say 5% shareholding of the Scottish ministers, something like that. So PUK had a direct relationship with Scottish ministers, which is probably relevant to our appointment at some stage. And we had a cadre of professionals who did a whole range of things. And it's fair to say that the remit did expand beyond PFI PPP. So I will give you, and we became part of the commercial corporate finance type expertise within government. So let me give you an example of something that would not have been under PFI. When Railtrack went into administration, I and a few others were called in to help, prior to that administration, support ministers and the senior special advisors. And then actually we had a role to set up Network Rail. So it became a centre of commercial expertise within government to support the public sector, primarily focused on the pursuit of PFI PPP programs.
Thank you. What I wanted to do was I'm not conscious your answer is that you don't remember much of this, but I'm going to show you the document and we'll talk about what we might be able to extract from it. If we can go to bundle 43, volume 3, document 5 at page 1717. Now, it's fair to say, Mr. Stewart, we have not recovered an awful lot of Partnerships UK. Sorry, 433. Sorry, page 433. We've not recovered an awful lot of Partnerships UK material from Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board. And when was Partnership UK closed down?
2010. So 2010, Partnerships UK was split 3 ways. We had some investments which were sold off. We had a local authority, local health body business which went to an entity called Local Partnerships, and the rest of it went into the Treasury and became part of Infrastructure UK. So you're right. I mean, I certainly have no access to any PUK. I don't have access to my notebooks or any PUK correspondence relating to this project.
Indeed, and all we've managed to find is a series of letters. And by way of example, one moment when your colleague, Ms. Phillips, provides advice on a particular issue that's not particularly relevant to what we're looking at, and the minutes of the meetings you attend, and a couple of other documents. So this is an internal memo, which I'm sure you never saw, from Mr. Calderwood to his colleagues on the 24th of July 2008, and it attaches your letter, which Mr. Calderwood clearly thinks from the second paragraph sets out how you think PUK could add best value to the project. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is just you've had an opportunity to read the letter, which is on the next page. Can I take it you've read the letter? It's quite a long letter setting out what was offered.
I have read the letter, yes.
Firstly, does it look like the sort of letter that Partnerships UK might write to a potential client back then? We're not talking about something rather unusual.
No, I mean, it looks like the proposal that we would have made at the outset. Now, what you cannot determine, because you don't have the exchange of letters that follow. Well, I certainly haven't seen the exchange of letters that's referred to somewhere. Is what particular services they chose to take up. So this is a full menu. This is a full menu of options. Now, undoubtedly, they definitely took up the option to put me on as a non-exec on the board. But the one of the bits I really don't remember, and I haven't read anything that gives any more information, is to what extent people in my team at PUK were doing other things on the project.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think possibly I can jump ahead and help you answer that, because we found your invoices, and they're a very long time ago. So I hope you won't be embarrassed if I show you a few of them.
No, I've seen one invoice. I only saw an invoice that was for, I've got it in front of me actually, because actually I only saw it yesterday, and I wish I'd seen it about 2 months ago, because it's the clearest explanation of what I actually did.
Well, indeed, and we only found it about a month ago. So let's go and look at it. So it's Bundle 52, Volume 4, Document 1. Now, it starts off with an invoice dated the 26th of November 2009. Now, that matters to us because it is about 2 weeks before contract close. And that affects our understanding of what's going on at the time. It records work only by you and by Miss Phillips. And it doesn't include an awful lot of hours. Or do you think that's we'll look at the period, and then you can give me a feel for how much work you thought you were doing. If we go on to the next page, we have timesheet details, and these cover a range of periods. So there's an entry from March for both you and Miss Phillips, and it runs through to the end of October. And then on the next page, we have your expense details, which will serve to be helpful to answer one of your questions about whether you actually flew up for a meeting. Now, we also have a further
I hadn't seen it. I'm just looking at the expense page because I hadn't flipped the page to look at it. Okay, yeah.
So there is another one, which I'm just going to put on the screen, and we'll just take you through that, which is the same volume, and it's document 2.1. So it's page 11. And this has the same date. And it's a much smaller invoice for time, but it has more timesheet information on the next page, page 12. And again, it starts in March. And then page 13 contains expense details, which are also quite handy because they cover a period. And it's fair to say, I think, that this whole period that's covered by this expense detail page, page 13, is the period we're interested in. And
okay.
I wondered if you might agree with something I might put to you, that it looks from these invoices that your role is quite close to being limited to attending the boards, because you're not doing large set pieces of work, according to these invoices anyway. Does that feel right, or am I pushing it?
No, I don't think you're pushing it at all. This invoice was very helpful to me because it looks like it does cover the full period I was involved. Let's just go with what it doesn't cover. I would be surprised if Claire Phillips only spent an hour on this project.
Well, I would be too, because I'm about to show you a report she wrote. Okay,
so that's my hesitation on this invoice, is it covers me.
Yes.
And I think I can't say this with great certainty, but it looks like it does cover the role I played on the project, right? That because it would be strange if there was an invoice for this period that didn't have, if I spent other time, right, they didn't cover that other time. So, and even though this is 16 years ago, normally my memory would be better of a project, but my rationalization is actually this is consistent with me spending relatively little time on this project and therefore not going to. So for the record, I can't say this with certainty. I think this is probably an accurate reflection of the time I spent, and to pick up your point, I think it's probably fair to say the majority of time I spent on this project was in the board meetings for which, and to be honest, the other meetings that you have minutes of, and which are detailed on this invoice.
Indeed, I mean, I've checked, and they match your attendance at meetings. Sometimes you travel out the night before and have a meeting.
What is strange? The thing that surprised me was that there was if you go to the 22nd of October 2009,
yes,
there was a seminar.
Yes.
The following day there was a formal board meeting. So what I imagine is they had a long all-day meeting to go through the tender evaluations, and then they ratified the decisions formally at the board the next day. Unless you've got it, I can see no record. There's no attendance list of who actually was at the seminar. And what is strange about this invoice is it says that I was at a meeting with Alan Seaborn the day before, i.e. the 21st. So the implication of that is that I actually went to have a pretty long meeting on the 21st. I didn't attend the seminar on the 22nd, and I certainly didn't. I don't know that for a fact, but and then the minutes record me as sending my apologies on the 23rd for the board meeting. And what's also strange is that I then didn't attend any other board meetings at all.
Yes, because if we go to page 7 on this bundle, I mean, this is slightly jumping out of my order, but it's useful to do. If you look at the last entry, has you having a meeting with Mr. Seaborn. But what's perhaps a little bit strange, and on the next page, page 8, you do fly up because we have your car being parked at Gatwick. I mean, it's been a lot of inflation. Not that page. That's the wrong month. We don't have your car being parked at Gatwick, so we don't actually have travel for you for the journey that takes you to the meeting, if that makes sense.
But sorry, I'm sorry, I'm looking for this first time. What that is consistent with is that I went up for a meeting the day before the seminar that preceded the board meeting, but I did. This sort of shows that it doesn't look as though I attended the seminar, but I did. But as I said, an all-day meeting the day before. But it may be that I just had a clash, and I said to them, I can't be there on the 22nd and the 23rd, and therefore I'll come up on the 21st. That may be the case, but I don't know.
So if we can take that off the screen, what I resolved to do, having reviewed all this, was to put to you this: that you did attend, and we'll look at each meeting, a sequence of meetings between April and August, and then you didn't attend any more after that. And so I'm working on the basis that the only things I can reasonably ask you questions about is things that happened at the meetings that you are recorded as being present, albeit that you might not recollect, and I might have to try and reconstruct what happened by asking you more nuanced questions. Let's do that.
So just to be clear, I don't remember, but from my reading of the documents is consistent with what you just said.
I appreciate that, and we hear your caveat. Before we do that, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you a question, which is a bit like is slightly expert-based question, because one of the issues we're exploring is the remit of this executive board and whether it actually did its job properly. And so, to explain the context, we know from the logs maintained by the negotiation teams between the tenderers and the health board that there was an issue around the ventilation of the Brookfield Europe bid. And this was not resolved until a matter of days before contract close. So that's in December. And it was resolved in favour of accepting the proposal, albeit that it breached Scottish Government guidance, when Scottish Government guidance had been within the employer's requirements. And I'm assuming that you would have not read the employer's requirements because you'd have charged some time to do that, and there's no suggestion that you did that.
I don't know, but I would doubt it.
Exactly. So the thing we're investigating is, what did the governance process do in order to approve this decision? That is, to go ahead with ventilation that's not compliant with guidance. We know the decision to do that was made in December, after your last attendance, and from all the face of it, after your last involvement. So I can't ask you about what happened at the meeting that happened just before then. But I can ask you about governance of procurement. And you've given a very interesting answer, which I want to explore. But before I do that, can you help me explain what assurance is in the context of a procurement project?
I can.
So what is assurance and how does it work?
I mean, this is quite a big subject. It is, I'm not an expert in it, but I know quite a lot about it. And I definitely wrote a chapter on it in my HS2 review. So one has to distinguish between assurance within the exec delivery entity, and they have many different forms. And that would be, are you familiar with the 3 lines of defense?
Well, it'd be helpful if you could set it out, because one of the advantages of public inquiry is we need to run this out in public if we can.
So a normal assurance process within a delivery entity would be 3 lines of defense, which is the executives performing the task as the first line of defense, some kind of internal challenge, and then some kind of third party challenge. Those are the three lines of defense in a normal sense. In a big project where there are this is typical of a public sector project as opposed to a private sector project. There will be approvals required by well, possibly the board, but I'm actually going wider than the board. That you know, in the context of the UK government, English government, it would be, or the context of HS2, it would be a DFT approval or a Treasury approval or a Cabinet Office approval, and those parties could themselves apply some assurance.
So it might be a sort of 4th layer, as it were.
So let me explain, because I'm familiar with this. In HS2 Limited, the delivery company would have its 3 lines of defense, overseen by the Audit and Risk Committee, which is a subcommittee of the board. The department appointed what they call a project representative, a PREP, which is actually my old firm, KPMG, who were providing assurance on behalf of the Department for Transport. And then the Department for Transport also commissioned external reviews by something called the Independent Assurance Panel, who would come in and review a particular issue and write reports. And then in addition to that, you would have the Infrastructure Projects Authority, who would conduct additional reviews. And in addition to that, you have something called MPRG, which would run reviews, assurance type reviews on these projects. So in a typical project, there are multiple levels of assurance. And one of the things that I concluded from my HS2 review was that you need an integrated assurance plan, which ensures that the assurance processes are joined up, complementary, not duplicative, and certainly not disagreeing with each other and confusing everyone. So I'm not familiar with what the external assurance on this project is. And let me also make one very important distinction, that assurance is different to expert advice. So you have to distinguish between the advice you're getting from a technical advisor, for example, from assurance. Technical advisor is part of the team, which the assurance is then applying its processes to.
Well, that's helpful because it means I can put my questions in some context. So if we go and look at the original first meeting that you seem to have attended, and I'll try and put it in context before I ask you a question. We go to, it's the 8th of April 2009, it's bundle 42, volume 2, document 8, page 44. And it appears to, we understand from its chair, who's given evidence, Ms. Byrne, that it's a joint meeting combining the Joint Procurement and Finance Group and the New South Glasgow Executive Board. And you appear...
I don't want to disagree with you. I don't think this is the first meeting I attended.
Right. Well, it's the first one you've got records for. That's interesting.
I think I attended a procurement and finance group in February 2009, which was so if this is my understanding from reading the papers,
Yes.
there was a procurement and finance group. The first meeting I attended was in February 2009, which was the procurement and finance group, and then they decided to merge the procurement and finance group and another group to create that joint board, I think.
Well, I'm going to just say out loud, ask one of my colleagues to just track that one down before the coffee break. But this meeting, we understand, is one of two, and the second meeting is on the 24th of April, bundle 43, volume 7, document 6, page 15. And in essence, our understanding from Ms. Byrne and from Mr. Seaborn is that these two meetings effectively approve the employer's requirements, approve the issue of the tender, and discuss and approve the evaluation methodology. And I'm assuming you don't remember whether that's the case. But having read the minutes, do you see that's roughly where we are in the process?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, at this stage, if we're thinking back to the idea of multiple layers of assurance, can you, from reading the papers I've sent to you, so this one and the ones that follow, see if you can reconstruct what you would have known about the layers of assurance in this project at this time? So was there there you can't, right?
I can't remember. I can tell you, I can say what I would have expected, but I
That would be
can't
helpful.
tell you.
That puts it in context.
But I absolutely can't tell you. I mean, my understanding is the same as you because I'm reading the minutes, and that is my recollection is only what I can read in the minutes. I have no. I'm afraid to say, and I apologise for this, but I hopefully did make it clear, but because I don't like being unhelpful, but I literally cannot remember these meetings. But let me tell you what would be normal at a board. So if you're sitting, well, because you asked this earlier, I'm just going to give you, the first thing to say is that project boards for projects are different. So there is no standard template for the way in which a project board operates or even who sits on them. And I have sat on many, many project boards for many, many different projects. And there are different manifestations of them. I mean, I have just redesigned the way the governance of HS2 operates, which proves my point, or made recommendations on the redesign. But when you sit on a project board, you are, as a non-exec, as I did, you are heavily reliant on the information that you're given by the exec, and you are heavily reliant on their judgment as to what it is appropriate to escalate to a board. And you know, the general rule of thumb would be that they should escalate, bring to attention matters that are material. Now, linking into the assurance process, often, but not always, one of the recommendations that might come out of an assurance report is this risk should be brought to the attention of the board. So again, going back to my HS2 example, which I've done a forensic on recently, at the critical point when the main contracts are being let for the civil works on HS2, there were some assurance reports prior to the decision being made to let those contracts, and those assurance reports made clear statements about a few items that should be brought to the attention of the board. So the board may not see the assurance reports, by the way, that might be dealt with in a subcommittee. I'm just talking about normal practice now. But the board is relying on assurance processes. It might get details of the assurance process, and it's relying on the executive and to a certain extent the assurance processes to bring to the attention those things that matter to the board. That's how it would normally work.
Thank you for that. There are I think, 3 more meetings that you attend, and one of them sets up the remit of this executive board, and you've read that and you've answered questions about it. And then there is a meeting on the 3rd of August, which is the last one you attend, according to the minutes we can find.
Agreed.
Now, would you agree with me that there's nothing in those minutes, and of course the minutes might not be right, that record the board, this board, the executive board, being told about assurance, being told about any suggestion the project would not deliver what the employer's requirements had set out?
I have not read anything that says that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I suppose we have latched onto is the remit of the executive board, which it received on the 1st of June, which is the penultimate meeting you attend. And that remit is on bundle 34, document 21, page 145. And the actual remit, this is the report to the performance review group, which is the board committee that sits above us. If we go to page 152, we have the actual remit. Now, you may not be able to do this, but if you could, it would be of assistance. Having looked at this document, which runs to 2 pages, the next page 153, and going back to 152, thinking back to practice at the time, because you can only really judge an organisation by what was conventional at the time, does this read like a sufficiently detailed remit in terms of reference for an executive board in a project of this scale?
Well, I've read it, but I've not reviewed it in the light of that question. So I think I would be giving you unless you want me to spend 5 minutes reading it and then give you the answer.
Well, what I might do is, we in a little bit of time, we will stop for a coffee break. And that seems like quite an important question that we'd like to have an answer. So when we get to that stage, I'll ask you to look at it then. But what I'll do at this point is to particularly draw out 2 of the matters in here. And this is the 4th and 5th item after role and remit. The 4th is the executive board will have delegated authority to conduct and conclude negotiations at project critical moments. Now, when you were at 2 meetings, this one and the following one, and you don't remember the meetings. But looking at the minutes, is there any suggestion this committee is conducting and concluding negotiations, or is someone else doing that?
Well, I find that wording surprising. So this, you have to help me here, but I'm assuming that this, because the boards have such long names, and they change their names. I think it changed its names 2 or 3 times while I sat on one.
It is one of the problems we have.
Yeah. So forgive me for being confused about exactly which board and its delegate. But let's just assume for a moment that this board has delegated authority from the main board of the hospital that has ultimate responsibility.
I think it has delegated authority from a subcommittee. So the performance review group, which I just mentioned, to whom this report is referred to, is a subcommittee of the main board. So just to give you context, the main board has a subcommittee performance review group, and it has created a series of executive boards, one of which is this.
Okay, so it is a slightly strange concept to have an executive board with non-executive members. That's the first point I would make.
Yes.
Because by definition, I was non-exec. So by definition, the board was not conducting the negotiations with the bidders.
No, in fact, there's a project team below the board. Precisely.
So this word executive is a funny word, quite honestly. Now, I mean, there are bigger fish to fry than to challenge that sort of thing when you're on a board. But the fact is, this was a project board that oversaw the executive team that were responsible for conducting the project and the negotiations and everything else. That I'd be confident in saying that. And I was a non-exec member of this board. And I attended board meetings where reports were given. I'm just going from what it says in the minutes now. But I had no involvement. I didn't meet a bidder or had no involvement in the evaluation or any of that, what I would call the executive tasks of delivering this project.
And I think just to assist you, it would be fair to say that at the meetings you didn't attend in October, when they this board discusses the procurement results, as it were, of the evaluations that have been produced in the seminar that you're confused about why you're not there, as we discussed earlier on. The people in the executive board who are discussing that evaluation result, some of them were in the evaluation and know the names, and some of them clearly don't. So it has this strange mixture of people who are knowledgeable and people who are non-executive.
But you're getting into this debate of corporate governance where, there's always a debate in a corporate governance world as to what extent the senior executives sit on the board of the company. So do executives sit alongside non-execs on a corporate board? And people take different views on this. In this instance, you're right. It appears that the executives responsible for delivering the project, actually involved in the evaluation and all that sort of stuff, were sitting on this board alongside non-execs. But I think when that, I'm going generic now, not this, but when you have non-execs and execs sitting on a board, those different roles are recognised in the way the board operates. Everyone has a statutory legal duty as a company director, so that is consistent. But the fact that some people are non-exec and some people are exec, at times will mean that their roles are slightly different in a discussion. So, for example, an executive member of a board may well actually be responsible for delivering a report on an activity. And clearly, they are therefore playing a different role to a non-exec who is listening to that report, challenging it and holding somebody to account and all the rest of it. So I think that, looking at the minute, I think that is the case here, where you had both executives and non-executives on a board that was, I'm going to use the word, overseeing the project.
Which brings us to the next item on that list. We go back to page 152 and we look at the fifth row after role or remit, which is the board will oversee the management of change control procedures, in that any change which impacts on the project must be authorised by this board before it can be implemented. Now, I take it you don't remember having any discussions with Mr. Seaborn about what change control process there should be? No. Can I take you to an aspect of your questionnaire where we put something to you? Now, if we go to your statement, page 200 of the statement bundle, question 8. So we start off by asking you questions about the hospital ventilation system, which you answer at the bottom of this page by observing that you're not an engineer. I do appreciate that. Over the page on page 201, we ask you about what we call the ventilation, the green ventilation derogation in question 9, and you can't remember whether you're aware of this or not. Question 10, we ask you, how was the decision made to accept this? And you say you can't remember whether you were aware of this or not. You then explain your role in more detail at the bottom of page 201. If we go to page 202, we ask you a more high-level question. Would you expect the decision to depart from guidance set out in the Scottish Government Technical Memorandum on Hospital Ventilation be reported to the project board, drawn to the attention of the Greater Glasgow Board or Programme Board, and ultimately the Scottish Government as part of full business case application? If not, why not? And you observe that you're not an expert, you haven't read the guidance, you don't know and understand the exact issues. But then in the fourth line, you say, however, if a decision was made at the time to depart from the guidance, and this was a material issue, a departure from best practice and minimum requirements, then I would have expected the board that I sat on to be notified and the board to have a discussion on whether to notify the matter to other governance bodies. Can you perhaps explain, given that you're not an expert in the field of ventilation, why you reached that conclusion?
Well, putting it bluntly, I don't think you need to be an expert in ventilation to form that view. Let me explain what I mean by that. Is when you sit on a board of a project, there are issues that you have lots of experience in, which you can challenge and comment on with confidence. And you can understand the detail, and you probably are in a better position to ask questions than maybe some other members of the board who have other skills. And that is why you have diversified boards, because the diversified board in terms of skills, experience, gender and everything else is designed such that around the board table, there are different experiences and different expertise. So when you sit on a board, you, to a certain extent, do rely on your board colleagues. So when it came to commercial issues or how to run a tender or all that sort of stuff, then quite possibly other members of the board will be looking at me. And you can see from those minutes that I do challenge on issues like that quite clearly. When it comes to matters that are out with your direct experience, and technical specifications is a good example of this, not just, but then what you need to satisfy, I'm talking generically now, not on this project, but what you need to satisfy yourself is that the appropriate level of expertise exists within the executive, you have the right resources and capability within the executive. They are receiving the appropriate external advice, hence why these projects have technical advisors. And as I understand it, this project did have technical advisors of varying sorts, so I'm sure you're talking to. And that there is an assurance process in place as a third-party check to peer review what's going on. Right. So as a board member, you would try and ensure that the building blocks for successful outcomes are there, and the processes are there in the way the project's been run, and the way the governance is operating. And can I remember whether we covered all that in the board meetings? No, but I'm just saying that would be a normal process. And then in this instance, in the sort of detail of the specifications, you are relying on a combination of those three things which I've just talked about: the executives involved, the external technical advice, and the assurance, to bring to your attention material issues. But you are relying on that. You're not going to spend, as a board, typically, I don't know whether it happened in this case or not, or if it did happen, where it happened, but you're not going to spend a lot of time going through a detailed technical specification on a project board, in my experience. So you're relying on those parts. Now, I'm going to give you one important caveat to this. Well, so it's not a caveat. It's a additional comment. You asked me earlier about how PUK operate. The reason why we wrote the proposal letter in the way that we did is that it was consistent with our philosophy that if we have a member, that the best way of supporting these projects is to have a member of the project board and people working with the project team. And the reason for that is, and I was often the person sitting on the project board, is because I had another information channel on the project.
Because you could talk to your colleague who was working closely.
Exactly. I wasn't relying solely on the executive. And there were definitely times when I was told things on other projects where I would then use that information to escalate the matter on the project board, or indeed with the wider stakeholders. I would actually go to the perm sec of the department or somebody in the treasury and say, I've been made aware of this issue, you need to deal with it. I do not know, and this is why I asked you the question, I do not know to what extent I had team members working in this project. The evidence that I've seen indicates that we didn't have I didn't have team members embedded in this project. And as a result, I wouldn't have had that separate sort of channel of information coming to me.
So I think you raised a few things I want to come back to.
But let me just put an important but on this. Having said all that, the chances of the specific issue, if I've understood the issue correctly, that you're dealing with, which is a I don't know how you characterize it, but the ventilation specification being less than the minimum standard, or whatever the words are, right? That's not the sort of issue that would have come up via my team, because it's a technical issue on the project.
No, indeed. If we just look at the only piece of work we can find that your team did, which is Bundle 43, Volume 6, Document 23, page 439, which is a piece of advice to Mr. Seaborn from your colleague, Ms. Phillips, on the 15th of December 2008. Which
I've read it.
You've read it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's generic. I mean, it's not generic. It's that's the wrong word. Take that back. It's not generic. What it is it's the sort of advice you give as someone's about to embark on a process. You know, these are the things that you should be thinking of as you embark on a process. It's not advice on consequences or things that are actually happening.
Yes, it's not a response to a particular issue. It's you're starting. Here are some things that you asked me about. Here are
best
some
practices. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we go back to I'll take it off the screen. If you go back to your previous answer, now I may be wrong, but until we started preparing for your evidence, the concept of assurance was not something we were reading about in statements, reports, papers, minutes, or emails. It doesn't seem to be the case there was any assurance system in this project. Now, it might have been, but we haven't yet found evidence of it. Thinking back to 2008-9, would that be unusual?
I can't remember. I'm trying to track. The fact is, right today, a project spends an enormous amount of time thinking about assurance. They do, you know, and that's a whole chapter in my HS2 review. How important was assurance at that time?
I can find a Treasury guide from 2012, which looks like someone wrote a new Treasury guide, but it may be a new edition, and I haven't found the older version.
Well, you should look at the OGC was set up in, well, it's a very similar time to PUK.
Yeah.
Peter Gershon ran it, and they instigated gateway reviews.
So there was a gateway review. So
yeah,
gateway review,
which is a form of assurance, but
right.
it's not. But it's gateway review is not first, second, third line defense. The question you should ask is, to what extent do they have first, second, third lines of defense?
Well, that's the stuff we can't see. That's the material we can't see. So we don't have any records of the decision-making process around this derogation, if that's the right word, other than the logs of the negotiations with the tenderer.
I'm afraid I cannot remember. You know, it's a very difficult topic because assurance processes have developed over the last 25 years. I just can't remember the state of play. We introduced gateway reviews, definitely, and they were seen as very helpful, but they are independent assurance reviews which sit on top of first, second, third line of defence process sit within individual company. The MPRG was Major Projects Review Group, which wouldn't have covered this project, was introduced towards the end of my time at IUK. So I'm talking probably sometime, you can look it up, sometime around the timing of this project. Of course, we're dealing with a Scottish project here, so the Scottish executive would have had different external assurance processes potentially to a project in England. So I can't remember what processes the Scottish government ran, but what we're talking about here is the first, second, third lines of defence that existed within the Glasgow hospital.
Now, just to recap, I want to make sure I understood something you were saying. Did you say in your earlier longer answer that the technical advisors' reports would go to the project team, who would then have to decide whether to escalate them to the board, and that needs a first line assurance process?
No, let's be clear.
Yes, please.
In normal circumstances, I'm not going to give you the details of the project, I just don't know or remember. In normal circumstances, the project team would have external technical advisors to provide professional advice of a technical engineering nature.
And at this point in time, it did have them.
Who was it? Was it Curry and Brown? If I read that, it was
Curry and Brown. It was Curry and Brown, and a team of M&E, healthcare planning, and other consultants.
Yeah, I just saw Atkins' name somewhere, and I just didn't know quite what they were doing. But anyway, they had technical advisors. So when it came to drawing up the technical specification, and indeed engaging with the contractors, then it would be the responsibility of the team and the technical advisors to come to that conclusion. The issue on assurance is, I'm just basing this on my experience. Assurance tends to look at processes rather than actual detail, because the people doing the assurance are not generally the technical, they don't have the technical expertise. So I think in normal circumstances, you'd rely on the technical advisors. To what extent the assurance would cover the specification, I just don't know.
But there should be a first, second, and third line system in the process.
Yes, but how you design that for a technical specification, I'm not a great expert on, and would vary, I suspect. But from a board perspective, in this instance, you'd be relying on the exec, the technical advisors' competence, and possibly assurance. I don't know.
So I think we can probably wrap up this section with one final question on the meeting minutes you've read of the ones you attended. Would you accept that there doesn't seem to be any evidence of a change control process being reported to those committees, as far as the minutes show anyway, because your memory doesn't extend back that far?
Yeah, and I've read some other stuff which shows that the chair and the other execs don't believe it was raised either. Indeed. But yeah, from the minutes, yes. But as I said, from a board perspective, you would be relying on the exec to raise material issues.
So what I'm going to do, Mr. Stewart, is I'm going to ask you to reflect on two questions. We might take a coffee break a little earlier, and then hopefully we'll be able to wrap up relatively promptly. So the first question is, please do look at the remit and see if you can help me about whether it feels to be a sufficiently comprehensive document for a board level, above the project team level committee or board for the time.
Could you just remind me of the reference?
Yes, of course.
For that
so
document?
It's on. We'll put it back on the screen. So it's
it's just that's my iPad, which is quite small. So if you
I appreciate that. I'll give you the
computer.
page references as well. So it is. Bundle 34, document 21, and the paper starts at page 145, but the remit here is a page 15152. It's called Appendix 2.
Thank you.
And the other thing that I would ask you to think about is we've been asking all the externals in this project that we can track down. So that's not just you. Mr. Baxter and Mr. from Scottish Government attended these meetings. And Mr. Winter was a non-executive director who didn't attend these meetings but had some form of challenge role. And we're asking them all the same question around this issue. To what extent is it a reasonable criticism that, in this case, your role as Partnerships UK would appear not to have noticed that the project team weren't reporting things to the board? And is that a criticism of the idea of putting in externals like yourself on these project boards?
Do you want me to answer that now?
Yes, of course. If you want to, you can think about it over coffee if you prefer.
No, I don't need to think about it anymore. The reality is that when you sit on a project board, the project board places a heavy reliance on the executive and their advisors when it comes to technical issues, the specification of the project. That is the reality. The project board and the project board should scrutinize the processes and the resources and everything else, but as regards the detail of a technical specification, in my experience, that would not be discussed in detail at a project board. I will give you an example from my HS2 review, which sort of illustrates this point, which and it's you may find the example surprising. But one of the issues that I came up with on HS2 was gold plating of design. And I came across a viaduct. And I was told by one of the contractors they were asked to build an iconic design. So forget the detail of this. This is at quite a high level, iconic design. So I said to the contractor, where did that come from? And they said, we don't know, but we offered a cheaper design, and the offer wasn't taken up. I then went into the governance process of HS2 Limited and the DFT to try and discover, well, not into the governance, sorry, into the project, and to try and decide where this came from. Couldn't really find any evidence of where it came from. I then went into the governance structure and said, where is the challenge on, in this case, affordability grounds for that iconic design, in inverted commas? And one of my key recommendations is that it should be a more robust challenge on affordability grounds for design, environmental, you've probably heard about the famous £100 million bat tunnel, and planning issues. And that was a new recommendation on that project. So I use that. It's not a, well, I think it is an analogous example because it just shows that at a governance decision-making level, there is a heavy reliance on, there's a heavy reliance on the machine to produce designs and everything else. And what I was focusing on was the affordability of those designs. Not in your case, you're focusing on the safety of those, but they are analogous issues in my view. But the reason I'm using this example is that you would have thought there was more likely to be a locus on affordability than perhaps safety, where because affordability is more a matter for the board. So my answer to your question is, I don't think the board can be criticised because a board would not normally delve into the technical specification. It would rely on the executive to inform them of material variations to the specification which affected safety, or indeed it would expect the executive to come to them if there was something that was proving to be very expensive and they needed some guidance and decision in terms of what option they should take. Those are the sort of decisions that I would expect to go to a board.
And so the way you address that is by having this first and second lines of assurance internally in the project, so that the technical issues are brought out when they need to be.
Yeah, exactly that. So what is assurance there to do is to peer review the judgment of the people at the coalface of a team.
Thank you. Now,
that's what assurance is for.
So, my lord, what I'm proposing to do is, just we might have the coffee break now. I will ask Mr. Stewart to look at this document and reflect on it. I'll also take the opportunity of taking signings of the rest of the room to see if there are any further questions. Perhaps combine the two processes together. We might take our coffee break a little early.
Very well, we'll do exactly that, and maybe build in just a little more time than I would normally give to a coffee break. Mr. Stewart, you happy to come back, as it were, for 11:30?
Well, it won't take me that long. It will take me 15 minutes max. So 10, 15 minutes is fine by me to review that document.
Right. Well, we'll sit again at 11:30 after people have had their coffee and spoken to Mr. McIntosh. Thank you.
Could someone put on the screen that document?
We'll arrange for that to happen.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Right. Again, Mr. Stewart, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, I've changed to my AirPods, which will hopefully make your sound better. So
Thank
someone
you.
tells me.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you. Well, I have no questions from my colleagues in the room, but I have 3 questions myself. Firstly, the document that we showed you, page 152 of bundle 43, volume 7, as a remit terms of reference for what they call an executive board, how do you feel this fits in terms of the sort of thing that was being produced back in 2009 in terms of levels of detail?
Well, can I just go? I will answer that question, but I want to go back to what something we were talking about earlier, which is the executive nature of this board. So, having read this document more carefully than I had before, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, that it has specific NHS board delegated authority to conduct and conclude negotiations. That is an unusual sentence to see in a project board remit. So a normal, much more normal would be for it to say to oversee or monitor or whatever, words like that, the negotiations of on the understanding that then a project board would delegate that to the executive. That would be more normal in a project board situation. So again, I have no recollection of this, but I'm giving you my view based upon what I've read in this document. a conclusion you could draw from this is that actually this was more of an executive board, and that they chose then to put some non-execs on it. But I think in that situation, if indeed that was the situation, the non-execs would have a different role to the execs. Because it's clearly ridiculous, well, not ridiculous, it would be strange for me as a non-exec to have delegated authority to conduct and conclude negotiations. But it may have been appropriate for some of the executives on the board to conduct and conclude negotiations. So where does that leave me? It leaves me slightly confused as to the exact purpose of the board and the exact nature of the board, if I can put it that way. Because as I said, you can have executive boards, which are primarily executives that are responsible for delivering the project. And then more normally you would have a project board, which is one step removed from the coalface in terms of execution and is monitoring and overseeing the delivery of the project. Now, it may have been that this board was a hybrid of those two. And reading this remit, it appears that it was a hybrid. Your team may have a different view, but that is all supposition based upon what I've read in this remit. Because as I said, going back to those words, we'll have specific delegated authority to conduct. It's the word conduct that I find different to what I would expect to see. Because you wouldn't expect a project board, most of the project boards that I sat on, well, pretty much all of them, you wouldn't be conducting negotiations.
Thank you. Is the next paragraph more conventional if this is a non-executive board, although it's called one?
Which one are you referring to?
The one referring to overseeing the management of change control process procedures.
Yes.
That's more conventional.
That is more conventional. Will monitor. The words will oversee or monitor, those are more conventional words for a project board terms of reference.
Thank you. Now,
or will meet monthly to assess progress. You know, those are all more conventional.
More conventional, more right for the process.
But the trouble is, when you then you go down to the bullet points, it gets pretty. It gets more executive in those bullet points below.
Yes. So if we go to the next page, technical.
You know,
that seems very strange.
Just start negotiating commercial issues. I mean, well, no, that's not normally the role of a project board. And certainly as a non-exec, given that the invoice that you showed me only sees my attendance at board meetings and pretty much nothing else, then, you know, I obviously did not play a role in negotiating commercial issues because in the board there was no one to negotiate with.
Yes, because if you look at the voting members section, and you may watched. I'm not going to go through everyone's names and say who do you remember, but am I right to take it that you probably don't remember most of these people?
I remember if you want the reason I remember Robert Calderwell, because he always reminded me of Robbie Coltrane. But but I sort of vaguely I do remember Robert, but I mean God, but I do remember Robert, and I remember Helen, but not well, and I recognise the name of Alan Seaborn, but that's about it, to be honest. Because I know Mike Baxter. I mean, something else we didn't cover earlier, which is relevant. I know you haven't asked me this question. You didn't say, how did you end up on this board? And
well, I thought you didn't remember, but if you do remember, please do tell me.
No. Well, I'm going to give you a generic, because you asked me about PUK's role. So very often, when Partnerships UK, not very often, sometimes it's proactive, but sometimes in a number of cases, somebody like the Scottish Government in this case would have asked PUK to be involved. So I can't remember, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Scottish Government had said to the project, we suggest you have Partnerships UK, someone from Partnership, or James or Partnerships UK on the board. Now that doesn't mean that they were against it and they ran you know, obstructions against me. It just means that, but it does mean that somebody else may have suggested it.
The thing that's worth putting to you here is that if you look at that list that starts with Helen Byrne, we've heard from some of these people, and we're due to hear from others, but none of them, with the exception of Mr. Seaborn, are part of the project team itself.
Yeah.
So the only members of the project team we see listed here is Mr. Moyer in the non-voting members. So from our understanding, the only project team member on that voting members list is Alan Seaborn, and the only non-voting member is Mr. Moyer. The others are all higher up or elsewhere within the GGC structure, apart from yourself.
But
And Mr.
what proportion of the SLT do they represent? The senior leadership team of the hospital?
A high proportion, I think it'd be fair to say.
Yeah, yeah.
And many of them are actually board members of the board. So Mr. Calderwood will have been a executive board member of the health board at the top level.
Yeah. So the way I'm this is supposition again, but the way I would characterize this, looking at this, is this the senior executive of the hospital supplemented by 3 non-execs, Mike Baxter, me, and there's one. Is there one other? Or is it just us two?
I think it's just the two of you.
Just us two. Yeah. So it is the senior executive of the hospital, with the addition of Mike Baxter, Scottish Government representative, and me as a nominated sort of helpful expert, hopefully. That's the way I would characterize this board. Now, that's not, but and you have to assume the project team members, but given if this is most of the SLT, would report into this executive board. So, but even in that instance, I find it strange that this word conduct is in the remit. Because clearly, those executives are not going to conduct the negotiations. It's going to be done by the project team, unless indeed the executives did appear in meetings with Brookfield and the other suppliers. I don't know.
It doesn't appear to be the evidence, but we may find out more when we speak to Mr. Calderwood week after next.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on to a second question, which is, you've mentioned how a non-executive, a project team and its directors are rather reliant on the executive team to provide them information.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that can be probably in the light of what we've just spoken about. Let's be more precise about our language, my language. When we're talking about the executive team, we're talking about the project executive team,
Yes.
not the.
So the people on the project board, as you would call it, in this case, this executive board, are reliant on the people in the project team to provide them with information, is the point you're making?
I am.
Yes. So what does a member of a project board, an executive board like this, do to protect themselves and the project against not being told things by the project team?
Is that a generic question or a
It's a
specific
generic question because I've got a specific one that follows up, but in terms of all your experience, so things like HS2 review, if you go back to your iconic viaduct, there were people sitting on the appropriate board that would have made those decisions who, just as you described, are reliant on the project team to provide them information. And in some sense, they must have said yes, whether they realised or not, to this iconic, expensive viaduct. So what should they have done, or what should these people have done, to protect themselves against not being told things by the people actually doing running the project, in a generic sense?
Okay, so it's a good question. It's in a sense, but you're going into it's a question that goes to the heart of corporate governance, and I would say that if you look at companies that have got into problems, one of the common characteristics is of the board not being made fully aware of issues as they develop. I will give you an example on another project which is in the public domain. This is a project rather than a company. Crossrail, the project board were made aware 4 months before the supposed completion date, don't quote me on the 4 months, but a short period before the completion date, that the project was heavily over budget and 2 years too late. They had not been made aware of that information before that date. Now, so to go to your question, what do you do? I've talked about one example in my instance of PUK. There was definitely, I was a more effective non-exec when I had team members working on the project. So that's so extrapolate that to one of the techniques that I personally use. I'm not sure you'll find this written in the books. Is you have to try and create alternative channels of information. I can put it that way. So you develop a relationship with key executives, and you might have a one-to-one. The other thing that obviously exists in a corporate world, and indeed, and sometimes in a project world, is there are subcommittees of the board, and the subcommittees of the board allow you to delve deeper into issues. That's the whole purpose. You're taking out of the main board, which doesn't have the time to do this. So if you look at HS2 as a project, it will have a finance and risk committee. It will have a HR committee. It will have, crucially, an investment committee. So the investment committee is approving major contracts, and the subcommittee will have some representatives of the board plus some additional people who will be delving into more detail. Now, I don't know, because the papers that I read, the number of all these, as we were saying earlier, all these different names for different boards and different committees and everything else, I haven't looked in detail who was doing what. But the fact is, as a non-exec on that executive board, I did not sit on any other committees. Whereas in lots of other instances, there would be subcommittees where, as a non-exec board member, you would sit on them.
Yes, because the point that you might not be aware, or you might have forgotten, it doesn't really matter which, is that whilst this is a committee comprising largely the senior management team of the hospital, it's not by any means the board. Because this is a Scottish Health Board with some 60 board members, and there's a performance review group, which we've seen that this remit was reported to, which is a subcommittee of that board. And there's also the Acute Services Review Group, or board, I can't now remember at this precise moment, and which is chaired by the Chief Executive, Mr. Calderwood. And then below that, there is this executive board, which is chaired by Miss Byrne, who reports to Mr. Calderwood. And so above this committee, this executive board, there are at least 3 or 4 layers before you get to the actual board, if you ever do.
Yeah.
And so the question, I suppose, that arises from that discussion about what do non-execs do, and you've given some examples, is it does look, I'll just try and sum this up, it does look as if, from what we can reconstruct, Partnerships UK's role to some extent was limited, close to or nearly entirely to having you on the board. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of other activity. We can't be definitive. And Mr. Calderwood has given in his statement the belief that having you there was a great reassurance because Partnerships UK was being involved. But actually, does it provide assurance to put on a non-executive member, however experienced in procurement, if they're simply going to be sitting on a board that doesn't get told things? Is that actually any assurance at all?
Okay. One of the things that we always had to be very wary of in PUK was there was a kite mark associated with PUK involvement. So people liked having PUK involved because they could say, we've got PUK involved. And the problem we always had was we had to try and ensure that the degree of involvement that we had was sufficient to lend our kite mark to the project. And we didn't always get that right. I'm not saying we got it right or wrong on this project, but we didn't always get that right. But it was something we were always wary of. But the other thing that we had to recognize in life was that there is a spectrum between not being involved at all and being fully involved and having maximum impact and maximum influence and maximum value add. And we often did have to make the judgment that actually having some involvement would provide, and this is a very crucial word, some added value and assurance over and above what would have been the case if we hadn't been involved. So in respect of your question, I think it's too black and white. The question, i.e., unless we have a fully involved role with all the levers that we need necessary to do the best possible job, does that mean that we should only accept jobs in those circumstances? Or do we accept the limitations, respond to requests for help, and do the best that we can, quite possibly in limited circumstances? I would say that the based upon what you've said to me, and I think our combined reading of the paper, that our involvement was light touch.
From
in
the
this
point,
case, light touch. Sorry, that's an important clarification to light touch. Light touch in the spectrum of ways in which we got involved in the. So I'm not saying light touch as an absolute fact, but in the way we used to engage with projects, this was a lighter involvement than was the case in many other instances.
So from the point of view of the inquiry, if it turns out to be the case that this particular important decision wasn't reported to this executive board or any higher in the organisation, and the inquiry looks at the role of Mr. Baxter and you and wonders, well, maybe in the future we need more external challenge. Well, two questions. How would you respond to the suggestion that in this case, if you didn't spot that change controls weren't being reported, does that somehow undermine the validity of PUK being involved?
Well, I simply don't know whether that's the case or not, because I don't know whether I asked the question about change controls or not. So you can't say whether that happened or not.
No, all I can do is look at the fact that in the following 3 months, no changes were reported to this board. No one in the board.
But you know, there's two circumstances there. One is that change control was the remit of the board, but actually was never followed through as a responsibility. That's what. The second is that change control was clearly a matter for this board. The executive understood that, but they considered that no material changes were taking place that need to be notified to the board. Those are two perfectly possible scenarios, and I don't know which of the two are true. And all I will say to you is, in my experience, and I will, in this instance, my experience is very significant. I've sat on an enormous number of project boards and scrutinized an enormous number of projects. I'm struggling to think of an example where something in the technical specification, and I would argue quite deep down in the technical specification, the specification of ventilation systems, I'm struggling to think of an example of something like that that's been notified to a board that I've sat on.
Well, in this context, it's that it was part of the employer's requirements that the board approved, and then they changed it. So it's not that it wasn't done from the beginning. It's that they took it out.
Okay. So all I'm saying is, if the board has approved the employer requirements, then I think the board would have a reasonable expectation that employment requirements are being adhered to in a material way, with some materiality judgment, and would expect to be notified if that wasn't the case. As a board member, I think that's a reasonable thing to do, rather than, let's take this to the nth degree. Suddenly start asking questions about the ventilation system in the board meeting with no information to
Yeah, I
prompt that
understand that.
question. I mean, that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. In the same way as though I'm on a railway project, you know, let's take a health and safety issue, which would be sliding doors on a platform. As a board member, I wouldn't expect to start asking questions about sliding doors because, you know, I could ask questions about heating systems, ventilation systems, sliding doors, the signalling system, you know, the safety of the road, etc., etc., etc. At a board level, you wouldn't get into that level of detail. Even at a subcommittee level, I mean, I suppose if there was a technical design subcommittee, then you might do.
But there wasn't in this
There wasn't.
context.
Okay.
I'm just going to look at my colleagues in the room to see if there's anything that arises. I don't think anything does. My Lord, I don't think I have any further questions for Mr. Stewart, unless you have anything, my Lord.
No, there's nothing that I would wish to add. Mr. Stewart, we don't have any further questions for you, and accordingly, that is an end of your evidence. But before you leave us, can I thank you for your giving evidence this morning and in preparing your statement and the reading that will have gone behind that. So thank you for that, but you're now free to, as I say, leave us.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I can't be more helpful, but 16 years is a long time.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, my Lord, the next witness is this afternoon, Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Connell will be taking him, but that will be at 1 o'clock.
Right. Well, we'll reconvene at 2.
Just 2 o'clock. Sorry, yes, good point. 2 o'clock.